Into this. All right. So before getting into the event, I want to make a couple of quick introductions. So in case you're not aware of our company, we're called Berg Compliance Solutions. We specialize in helping small manufacturing companies in Texas and across the country to manage environmental health and safety, compliance, and risk issues. And the other thing I want to quickly introduce is Small Manufacturer Safety School. So one of our big part of our mission is to create free educational content to help small companies understand these regulations, manage these regulations with the end goal of protecting their employees, the environment, and their companies from harm. So with that in mind, we created this new online virtual series that they're going to be made. It's going to be made up of a series of 1 hour deep dive workshops that dive into the OSHA, EPA, and state environmental regulations that impact small manufacturing companies. So this is our second event. We're still trying to build the audience, obviously, here, but be on the lookout for more of these events. They're going to happen throughout the year. All right, so having said that, we can get going here. As you know, today's topic is OSHA's top 10 manufacturing violations and how to avoid them. Stick around to the end. We're going to have a Q&A session. And so the way we'd like to handle questions, Glenn, is use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And if you want to post any questions that come up in your head while we're doing the event, we'll just answer them at the end. And with that said, let me go ahead and introduce Joanne Nitrogen. Joanne's helped us over the years do a lot of free seminars. Thank you, Joanne, for all that help over the years, and has also volunteered to help out with this event today. So, Joanne, with that said, I'm going to hand it over to you, and let's take over from here.
Hey, success.
All right.
All right. So, as stated, we're going to talk about the top 10 hazards in manufacturing, and a little bit about these hazards and what you can do to control these hazards. So this is data that I collected for calendar year 2021, which is the last full year of data, and it is for Texas only. I could have run the report all of US, but most people that are in Texas are more interested in what's happening locally and what we're seeing in Texas as opposed to all of US. And also we're going to cover the OSHA emphasis programs for general industry. And what's important to know about OSHA emphasis programs are these are hot button issues for the national office. In other words, the national office has singled out these particular hazards and created programs to address those specific hazards. So when I say OSHA emphasis programs, what I mean is this is a hot button issue for OSHA that wherever we hear about the hazard going on or we see it, we have to address it, meaning we typically have to make an inspection to address it. So there's a list of those at the end. Okay, so here is the top 10. We're going to go through these one by one and explain them, so that hopefully you'll understand what it is we're looking for and what the hazard is. But these are the top 10. So number 1, machine guarding. Okay. So OSHA has a requirement for employers that have an amputation in the workplace. They have to call it in to the closest OSHA office within 24 hours of the workplace incident. And what that does is it generates a lot of reports, okay, of amputation incidents. What OSHA does with those reports is we look at them and we decide which ones we're going to inspect and which ones we're going to handle by an enhanced phone and fax method, okay? So about half of the time we do an inspection because we think, well, if you had somebody cut off a finger on a piece of unguarded equipment, there may be a likelihood that you have other pieces of unguarded equipment in your facility, or there's some problem over there that you're not putting guards on things, or people are taking them off and operating without guards. Okay. as opposed to sometimes we get reports where they're kind of like one-off reports of an amputation. For example, we had one where they were moving like a safe. I'm not so sure why they didn't do a job hazard analysis before they moved this safe, but they were moving a safe and somebody got their finger under it as they were moving it, and they crushed their finger and had to have an amputation. In that case, that's kind of a one-off scenario, and we would handle that by phone and fax, meaning we would contact the employer and say, okay, you had this workplace incident. What are you doing? Accident incident investigation, come up with the root causes, and then tell us what you're going to do. Send us your incident investigation and we'll review it so that we know that you've done everything you can to not have another one. Okay. So there's two ways we go with those. But like I said, it's number one because we're getting tons of reports of amputations because employers are required to send them to us. That's why it's number one. Okay. And what OSHA requires for machine guarding is we require that the point of operation, which is the spot where the work is actually done, is guarded. So in the picture, you can see that that's a power press, a mechanical power press. And in the middle, kind of in the middle between the two guys' hands, you can see there's a ram, and the ram goes up and down. And what it does is it goes chunk and it chops out that piece of metal, which is already missing on that particular piece of metal that they're pressing, punching out. Okay. So in this case, before we actually had amputations as an emphasis program, we had one specifically for mechanical power presses. And so our compliance officer went to a facility and she asked him, well, how do you do this particular operation? And so the manager showed her. And and so she took a picture of it. Okay. So you can see, well, you put this little wooden block under the end, and then you hold it like this, and then you cycle the machine and it punches out, the metal. So she took pictures. So from OSHA's standpoint, looking at the picture, it's like, where is this thing chunking out that piece of metal, and where is the guy's hands? Okay. You shouldn't be able to put your hand where the operation is. Okay. So we got a problem there, that it should be guarded. That area should be guarded. So you can't stick your finger in there when the machine is cycling. Okay. So in that case, that's the point of operation. You may have other things on machines that also move, like belts and pulleys. You might have in-running nip points. There's a lot of different things you can potentially have, but essentially, if it moves, you should be guarding it. Okay, so that's really number one. So also number one, this is a conveyor. And I wanted to show this particular piece of equipment. It's called a gotcha stick. And you can buy these. They're about 10 or 11 bucks, I think, on Amazon or wherever. But what it does is it imitates a person's hand arm. Okay. There's a table in the OSHA regulation that has all these different openings depending on how far you are from the point of operation on a piece of equipment. Well, a gotcha stick just imitates that. And you use it, for example, let's say a place where you would use it would be, let's say you have a shear. Well, a shear, usually there's like an opening, and the shearing action is, I don't know, 6 to 12 inches behind where the opening is where you slide something in. So you want to know, well, could the person actually touch where the shear action is? Well, you would use a gotcha stick to check that, to make sure that they couldn't actually stick their finger arm all the way in there to actually get to that point of operation. But in this case, they're using it on a conveyor to see, well, is there an issue where someone could get their finger in this opening on this conveyor? And of course, this was after a workplace incident where someone had actually done that. They had gotten a finger in there and had become injured. Okay. So this is just just another way of looking at machine guarding and another tool that could be used. And just realize that OSHA's regulations for machine guarding are really broad, and they just say, hey, if it moves, guard it. And that's Joanne's interpretation of the reg, in non-legal terms. But that's what we're looking at, is we're looking at pieces of equipment and we're evaluating them like, how can people get injured on this? We know they're not supposed to stick their finger over here, but can they? If there's nothing to keep them out of it and they can get in there, then you want to prevent that. Number 2, lockout tagout. So lockout tagout is used to safely take equipment out of service for maintenance and repair. And one of the requirements is that you have to have a written program that governs your lockout tagout procedures. And if you have any equipment that has more than one energy source, then you have to have a specific procedure that tells you which one do you control first. In other words, you may have a piece of equipment that has electrical energy going to it. It may have pneumatic energy going to it. There might be, gravity may be a factor on some of these. So you might have to use, blocking or something to keep something from falling once you've controlled the other types of energy, but whatever it is. So if you have more than one energy source, you have to have a specific procedure for that. Okay, in this case, one of the things that you're in the photo you can see is the no-no is they left the key in the lock. Okay, that key goes in the pocket of the person that applied the lock. All right, it's not to be left in the machine, because obviously anybody that could come along and remove the lock and then just start the equipment. And that is not what you want to have happen while your guy is working on your equipment. Other things that are required by the lockout tagout regulation are the worker training has to be documented. And when OSHA says documented or certified in any of our regulations, what we mean is you have to keep a written record of who is trained and when, so you have to have like a sign-in sheet from the training class or something of that nature, something that identifies it as lockout tagout training with a date, list of names, that kind of thing. One of the other things that you have to do is the person that oversees your lockout tagout program has to go and physically observe people, the authorized persons, those are the people that are authorized to apply locks and tags, observe them applying those locks and tags and doing the procedure. So that you have to spot check them to make sure that they're following your procedures correctly. And if they're not following correctly, that means either your written procedure is wrong or the employee's wrong in how they're doing it, one way or the other, and you have an issue with your program. Okay. And just realize that each person that is involved in the lockout tagout has to apply their own lock and their own tag and keep the key in their pocket. So if you have a lockout that involves 4 people, there should be 4 locks and 4 keys, and each one has control of their key. Okay, so number 3 is electrical, and we see a lot of bad electrical out there, a lot of bad, and it kills people. We had a staff meeting this morning right before I started this meeting, and we've had, I think this is the 4th, I think this is like the 5th fatality associated with drop lights with metal shrouds. Because what happens is those metal shrouds on those drop lights become energized and they electrocute people. So, you don't want to, when you have equipment, you want to make sure it's inspected, and preferably it's on a ground fault current interrupter when you plug it in, just in case there's some fault in that equipment. But some of the things that OSHA is looking for are listing and labeling, meaning equipment that is being used out there has been approved by one of the national testing labs, such as Underwriters Lab or Factory Mutual, or there's like 28 of them. Other things we're looking for are strain relief. And this is what OSHA calls the scenario where you have, for example, a extension cord and the plug is pulled away. And so you can see that there are wires in there and the outer covering over the extension cord is pulled away. We call that strain relief in OSHA. Marking breakers, in other words, all the breakers in your breaker box should be, sorry. Now where's, I have no idea who that is. Sorry. So disconnects and breakers have to be marked. So if we open the panel box, we should know what connects to what is in charge, what controls what, so that in the event of an emergency, you don't have people coming along and guessing which breaker do they need to turn off to while your guy is in the machine getting caught in the machine. Also, sufficient space around electrical equipment. The minimum is 30 inches in front of the equipment. So as you can see in the picture there, they decided to stack a bunch of junk in front of the breaker box. So that's a violation. Here's some other pictures of some other problems. One of the other ones that's out there is that you see people stringing flexible cords and cables, extension cords in the facility, such as in the bottom right, and they're using it in lieu of fixed wiring. In other words, what the OSHA reg says is, well, if we need, let's say we're in a facility and our machine is in the middle of the room and there's no electrical around there. What the reg says is, well, you need to run conduit and put like a pennant drop or something like that to that equipment, as opposed to trying to string an electrical cord, up along the rafters and dragging it over there and dropping it down. Okay, because flexible cords and cables are not anywhere near as strong or, it's not a proper way to wire stuff permanently. If you have extension cords, you don't want to run them through windows, doors, any place where they could get pinched or crushed, because once you've done that, then your question is what's the condition of the wires inside of that cord? Are they still good? After we ran the forklift over it, are the wires in that cord still good? Don't know. You should test it if you have that scenario and see if they're still good. But that's why, there are restrictions on how extension cords are used. Lastly, you can see that in many scenarios, if your equipment came with a grounded connection and the ground prong's fallen out, then that equipment no longer complies with what it's supposed to be doing. You've lost your worker protection. So we occasionally do see ground prongs missing. Lastly, one of the other ones we're always looking for are access to live parts, meaning in the upper right, you can see a knife switch plate that's missing. And that means that someone could accidentally touch something live inside that box. So workers should not be able to touch anything live in the workplace. Okay, so number 4 is injury reporting. In January 1st of 2015, OSHA changed our reg, and now employers are required to report amputations, loss of eye, or inpatient hospitalization of one or more workers within 24 hours of the workplace incident. Okay. But to be reportable, the amputation, loss of eye, or inpatient hospitalization has to occur within 24 hours. Okay. So the flip side of that is occasionally you may have, let's say you have somebody that gets their finger squished, okay, and And so they go to you send them to medical, ER, or wherever you're going to send them. And they look at it and they say, well, we're going to try and save this finger. Okay. And so they treat the person and they try to save the finger, but maybe 4 or 5 days later, they look at it and go, it's not working. We're going to have to amputate it. In that case, you do not have to report that to OSHA because the amputation did not occur within 24 hours of the workplace incident. Okay. So it's important to know when you do have to report and when you don't have to report. Frequently, we find that people simply don't report amputations. We have very, very few or no loss of eye cases, to be honest with you. We never get those, but we get a lot of inpatient hospitalizations and amputations reported. A lot of times the employer is not aware that they're required to phone them in. So then they wind up not doing it. And then we somehow hear of it some other way, or they report it late. And the reg says there's a statutory fine for not reporting timely. So that's why it's number 4. Relatively new rule. A lot of people not fully aware of it. Respiratory protection. This one really had to do with a lot of the COVID stuff that we were citing a lot of folks for respiratory protection, a good number of them probably in healthcare. But whenever you hand out respirators to workers, then you have to understand that there's a whole big, I call it a big enchilada of stuff you got to do. Okay. There's a lot of requirements. You can't just, if the painter comes and says, hey, I'm going to bring my own mask and wear that when I paint. Well, okay. But as an employer, you're required to make sure that mask the painter is bringing with him is adequate. And, number one, it's for the position, what he's going to be handling. In other words, the proper type of mask for the hazard, that it does fit him and there's nothing wrong with it. In other words, if it's not in good shape, it's not going to protect him. So there are issues with that. But one of the first things you have to do is you have to have a written program on respiratory use. It specifies what respirators are we going to wear for what air contaminants, who's going to wear them. In other words, what job positions, what's the training we're going to give people, how are we going to fit test people on these respirators to make sure that the respirator we're handing out fits that person well enough that it's going to protect them from the hazard, and what type of medical evaluation are we going to do to make sure that that person has adequate lung function and heart function that they can wear the respirator and do the job. Okay. So those are some of the considerations we have for respirators. And it's not just, things smell a little and we're going to give everybody a mask to deal with it. Well, you might be able to get away with, there's a provision for filtering face piece masks, essentially dust masks, under certain conditions where you don't have to do very much according to the OSHA regulation. But most of the time, if it's anything other than voluntary use and you are under a permissible exposure limit, that you will have to do a number of things for that regulation. So it's a lot of stuff. Powered industrial trucks. Here with a big one that we find is people like to modify trucks. They like to add funny things on them for specific tasks. And what happens is when you do that, you change the center of gravity of the truck. So you think, this modification you did is A-okay and all and for your specific purpose, but you may change the stability of the vehicle such that it's more prone to flipping under certain scenarios. So you can't make modifications without the manufacturer's written permission. We're going to look for nameplates on the trucks. That's basically like an electrical nameplate. It just says the type, the capacity, what all it's approved for. One of the big areas where people fall down is under operator training. And what OSHA requires is there's a whole paragraph, it's called paragraph L, on operator training in the regulation. And it talks about, there's like 12, 13 things that the operator has to know, some of which are things like they have to have both formal classroom training, they have to have practical training, they have to know how the controls operate. Somebody has to observe them safely operating the truck. And then they also have to be designated by the employer. So if you have workers that come to you and just say, oh yeah, I can operate that forklift truck, don't let them operate the truck unless they have gone through your training program. Okay. If you have any unsafe trucks, they have to be promptly removed from service. Obviously, if you have something that's unsafe, you don't want to be operating it. And you have to do, before each shift, you have to do a truck inspection to check that it is in good enough condition to use. Hazard communication. Hazard communication is OSHA's regulation that addresses how workers are going to be informed of the hazards of the chemicals that they use in the workplace. And it requires employers to obtain and maintain the safety data sheets on each chemical product and have a list of those chemicals, and also make the safety data sheets available to workers during their shifts. If you have any in-house containers like this squirt bottle of pink something or other, then it needs to be labeled as to what it is. Okay. Usually you're going to copy the manufacturer's label on the equipment, on the original container, and just slap that on there. That suffices. You have to train workers on how to read safety data sheets so that they can get and use the information they need to protect themselves from the hazards as well. Walking working surfaces. What OSHA requires is essentially is that walking working surfaces have to be clean, dry, orderly, and sanitary. Okay, so if you have wet floors, you can put mats down if they're normally always wet. Like let's say you're in food certain types of food manufacturing, you may have some wet floors sometimes because you have to wash down a lot. But in general, they should be dry. They should be level. Shouldn't have any little holes in them that people can twist an ankle in. Okay. No sharp protruding objects. So housekeeping has to be adequate so that people are not stumbling over things. Let's just put it that way. Other things that you'll see is that if you have a fall of 4 feet or more, then you have to guard against it. So you can see in the picture there, they're probably using a forklift to lift probably pallets up to a higher level. Okay, but what they've got is essentially they've got a wall opening. And if there's people working up there, there's nothing to prevent that person from stepping wrong and accidentally falling. Definitely more than 4 feet. So except when you're actually moving something in there, you should be have some sort of guardrail up there to keep people from being able to accidentally step off. If you have to make a repair to let's say a floor surface, and there's any kind of question about the structural integrity, then you have to get a professional engineer, like a structural engineer, to look at it and bless it. Okay, so it should be looked at by somebody that's their area of specialization. You are required to make regular inspections to ensure that the the floor is in good shape. And you also have to think about, in case of a fire or other emergency, how are people going to get out of here safely? Number 9 is the OSHA General Duty Clause. The General Duty Clause just says that employers have to provide to each employee a place of employment free of recognized hazards that can cause serious physical injury or death. And this is what we use when we don't have a specific regulation for something. For example, one of the ones we use it rather frequently, there's 2 scenarios really, 2 main scenarios we wind up using it. One is you have a piece of equipment and you're not using the piece of equipment according to the manufacturer's directions. And then somebody does something wrong, or it's not operating correctly according to the manufacturer, and it kills somebody. Okay. So that's one example. The other one is for oil and gas extraction. There are a whole bunch of American Petroleum Institute consensus standards. And when OSHA, because we do not actually have an oil and gas regulation, and they're considered general industry actually. But when we don't have a regulation that's specific to that, what happens is we cite them and say, you didn't follow the consensus standards. So this is where there's no regulation that addresses the hazard, and we are trying to use what we have in the general duty clause to address the hazard. Number 10, occupational noise hazards. When workers are exposed over 85 decibels on the A scale for 8 or more hours a day, then you have to institute a hearing conservation program. The hearing conservation program consists of providing hearing protectors, doing an annual audiogram on workers, meaning they get a hearing test, and then doing training on the hazards of noise. Okay, if you get to an average of 90 or more dBA over the shift, then you have to do those things, but you have to make wearing hearing protection mandatory. Okay, so, and just realize if you're required to institute a hearing conservation program, you also have to give people a choice of hearing protection devices. So earmuffs is considered a choice. Foam plugs is considered a choice. Flanged plugs is considered a choice. So you have to pick several things so that they have something to switch to if they've been using foam plugs and the inside of their ear gets irritated, and they need to switch to something else for a while for that to heal up. Okay, so at 90 dBA, it's mandatory. And you are supposed to post a copy of the regulation where employees can see it. So a little bit about emphasis programs. Essentially, what y'all need to know about this is these are the hot buttons, okay? And we have 2 types of emphasis programs. We have national ones. We also have regional ones. And the regional ones are for Texas and the states that touch Texas, which is our region 6. And we have a couple of them like for oil and gas extraction, because we have that issue in our operating area. And then some of them are everywhere in the US, so they call them national emphasis programs. If you wanted to look at these are on the OSHA website. You can read as many of them as you want. Essentially, OSHA makes everything available on our website, but they're available on the OSHA website for you to go look at and read. And then we also list in the emphasis programs what the targeted industries are. So for like oil and gas, it's only, it's obviously described by their North American Industrial Classification Code, which industries we're targeting there. So these are all of the emphasis programs for general industry. And so combustible dust, COVID in healthcare, amputations is a big one. We've had that many years. Some of the ones that are relatively new are transportation tank cleaning operations. Those are largely confined space hazards. So we'll go through these real quick too. How do we implement these? Essentially what happens is the area office gets a list from the national office of employers in types of industry where we think they have the hazard. Okay. And what we do is we'll mail the employer a letter that says, hey, you're being targeted, and here are the, to put them on notice and say, inspect your workplace and make sure you don't have this hazard, because you're in a classification code that pretty much we've found that you do have this hazard. So we send people a letter, and then we give employers 90 days to address the hazard, look at their workplace, and hopefully correct the hazard if they have the hazard. And then after 90 days, then what we do is we start conducting random inspections. So we get this list, it's actually randomized from the national office, and they start spot checking people on the list to make sure that they don't have the hazard, they've controlled the hazard. Okay. OSHA penalties. Our penalties have gone up. They go up every year in January. And so I don't even want to guess what they're going to go up next January, considering how bad the inflation's been this year. But this is the current list of penalties. And just realize these are the base fines. From the base fine, we take off, we make adjustments for size, history, and good faith. So if you're a small employer, then you'll get a reduction for size. History is based on whether you've been inspected before in the last 5 years. If you have not been inspected, we give you 10% credit for not being inspected. If you have been inspected, then we add 10%. And for good faith, it's based on the extent of your written program. So if your written programs are all in place, functioning, and being carried out appropriately, then you can get up to 25% reduction for that. So now more than ever, you want to make sure you control any serious hazards that you might have, which is the most likely one. You don't want to have any amputation hazards or anything like that, because those would be considered serious. So I think we're down to the end. This is my contact information. And are there any questions?
Thank you, Joanne. Nobody posted any. I have some, but before I jump into those, if anyone would like to ask anything, if you want to click on the raise hand option on the bottom, and I can unmute you, and you're free to just go ahead and ask verbally if anyone's got anything. Otherwise, I got a few that might help everybody. All right, so nobody's raising their hand, so let me jump in with you here, but feel free to jump in, anybody, if you'd like to. So the lockout tagout standard, the annual inspection, can you talk a little bit more in detail about what is required to meet that standard? Is it just doing random sampling?
Yeah.
Lockout tagout procedures, or you got to hit all of them? What does that look like?
You're supposed to observe each of your authorized employees once a year, at least. Okay. And you do have to keep a written record of some sort that you did it. Okay. It doesn't have to necessarily be a huge thing, but you should have some sort of written record so that you know that you actually did spot check everybody.
Okay. And so every authorized person, you might just run them through one lockout tagout procedure. Would that meet the requirement?
That would meet the requirement. Yep.
Okay.
I mean, if you have multiple types of lockout, it's better if you can have them, do one for each type of lockout they do. But the bare minimum is it also depends on how many lockouts do you do in a year. You might have people doing a lot of them and you might not have a lot of them.
Right.
So if you don't have, an employee doesn't have the opportunity to do a certain type of lockout, it's pretty hard to spot check them. But the
Okay.
bare minimum is that you should have at least looked at each person once a year doing a lockout. And then if
Okay.
you can, and if you have enough lockouts to do, each type of lockout, if they're significantly different, would be
Okay.
better, but at least one a year.
Glenn is asking if he can get a copy of the PowerPoint. Can I send that to him? You
Yep.
send me a copy of it.
No, you can have anything you want.
Okay. Okay, good deal. Fixed wiring. So if a company gets a new piece of equipment and they run an extension cord to it, is there a time limit? Can't they do that for like 3 months or something? Or is there a time limit, or has to be fixed wiring from the
Not well, if you know where you're going to put it, and it's going to stay there, you should do permanent wiring.
right?
There really isn't. There really isn't any. There isn't anything that says, "Hey, you got to do it within 3 months." People get a little confused. There is a portion of the reg that talks about temporary lighting for like Christmas decorations, and I think they do let you do like 3 months on those. But if it's part of your process, and it's like you installed it and right now you've put the an extension cord to it just to make sure that your layout is correct, we would expect you to have, after a week or two, we would think you would have been able to probably get this at least scheduled that somebody's going to put
immediately
power in. We want you to do permanent power as
Yeah.
quickly as you can. But there's no grace period or anything in the reg. So,
Okay.
If we went to your facility and you said, yeah, it's been like this for 3 months and we haven't gotten around to doing it, we're going to go, hey, you need to do it.
Yeah.
Because it's not moving, right? It's not moving. So it's not like it's a piece of equipment we roll into place and we use it and then we roll it back and put it in a storage area until the next time we need it. That's kind of a different scenario.
Okay, that makes sense. James is asking, I think this has to do with hearing protection. He's asking, where does OSHA stand on noise canceling earbuds or headphones? I'm guessing some employees probably want to bring their own. I'm guessing that's what he's saying. But.
The reg doesn't talk about them at all. And I'm trying to recall if I've seen any letters of interpretation on that specific thing. I know we've talked about people. We take a pretty dim view of people with like earbuds and stuff in general, because it's like, well, this is not hearing protection. And I have not seen anything on noise canceling headphones. I can. Do you have do you have his email address, Russ?
Yeah.
If I send you,
yeah. If you can follow up on that, we can email your response. That's a good question.
I can look and see if there's any. The last time I looked at some of the noise letters of interp, I did not see one on noise canceling headphones, but I can look and see if there's.
Yeah, James is clarifying, employees want to wear them in place of ear protection, in place of PPE, yeah.
Well, the thing is that I think OSHA's problem with that is if you have a hearing protection device, it's been tested by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, and it has a noise reduction rate.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if you have a noise canceling headphone, that hasn't been tested. So there's no way to figure out what the attenuation is.
Okay? Yeah, I figured that.
So I think we would say we can't allow them because they're not tested. Number one, they're not tested. Number two, you have no idea what the attenuation is.
Yeah.
Whereas with all of the equipment that's out there, on the box, it says NNR, 30 or whatever it is. So then when you're trying to select what's going to work for your workplace, you can pick something that gives adequate attenuation. So I have a feeling we're going to take a dim view of it, but I can double check and get back with you.
Okay, you can send that to me and I'll forward that on to James.
Okay.
On the injury reporting, the serious injury reporting, what is the citation if a company doesn't do that? I've always wondered that. You kind of mentioned it, didn't say.
Okay, so this is a little funny area, but the field operations manual, I believe, says it's a statutory fine of $5,000.
So it's not like a serious or a
No, I think it's it's a statutory fine. It's like I don't know if they, no, they don't classify it as a serious, I don't think. I don't think it's classified as anything. It's just it's like, I guess it's like not having an OSHA poster or something, which I guess we always cited that other. I'm guessing it would be another.
But 5,000
with a fine and the face fine. Well, okay, the FOM says that it's $5,000, but when I asked folks, the managers in the office, and they say, well, what we do is we send them out with $1,000 fine, and I'm like, okay, I don't know where they got it from, but the field operations manual says 5,000. But on the practical, what they're doing is they're sending it out with $1,000 fine.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Okay.
So it's coming out with a $1,000 to $5,000 fine, I guess, is what my summary is of that.
All right, fair enough. Carrie's asking back to the earbuds and the noise canceling and so forth. What if the employees do not require hearing protection? So you don't have, you're not exceeding the 85 or 90 decibels. But they want to wear earbuds in the warehouse or anywhere. You understand that? So
earbuds or noise canceling headphones. What are we talking about?
She has earbuds here.
Okay, so I would, okay, now this is okay, so if you are not at 85 dBA for 8 hours a day, which is the OSHA regulatory limit, then you're asking me a question that's outside of the OSHA regulation. So this is where Joanne gives her opinion, but it is not, this is not backed up by law. Okay. So I would suggest people wearing earbuds and listening to music and walking around in your warehouse is not a good idea. Okay. Because we've actually had fatalities where people were doing exactly that and got flattened by motor graders. Okay, they were walking her. Okay, so I'll tell you the story, and you guys can decide if this is what you want, the risk you want to take. So what happened is they were motor grading and just basically chopping down, getting rid of brush before they made a new road here, kind of on the north side of town off of 620. And what happened was there was a guy and he was being paid to pick up some of this, roots and stuff that had been torn up and, get them out of the way. And he was actually walking in front of the motor grader. And he was listening to music with his earbuds connected to his phone. And he leaned down to pick up some of this stuff. And when he did that, he got in a blind spot for the motor grader operator, and he didn't see the guy and ran him over and killed him. So the problem is that you don't really have any control over how loud the person is playing their music or whatever it is they're listening to. And if it's loud enough, it can drown out the vehicle, your forklift traffic, right? Them not being aware, and not seeing the forklift maybe they don't see the forklift operator, and hopefully your forklift operator is trained to look out for pedestrians, but if they get in a place they're not supposed to be in, then you can have somebody flatten somebody. So yeah, I would advise against it. But like I said, I'm outside of OSHA.
So couldn't that be a general duty clause thing though? I mean, if an employer allows somebody to wear earbuds and like you say, you know, at a manufacturing company, because just we'll keep it in a manufacturing setting, they get hit by a forklift and killed. Couldn't that be a general duty clause? Doesn't that fall under that?
Yeah, yeah, we would try. We would certainly try to
So that'd be
apply
a
that.
recognized hazard. They're
Yeah, we would try, but
okay.
you know, I'm just saying that it's not in the noise standard, that's for sure. So then we have to start looking at other types of regulations that could be pulled in, maybe.
Okay. All right. We
Not
have
a good
about 5
idea.
minutes.
Not a good idea. Now
Yeah.
I had somebody ask me the opposite question too, which is they had people that were in the warehouse and the employee wanted to wear hearing protection in the warehouse, even though it was less than 85 and dBA. And they were like, well, we're concerned they won't be able to hear, you know, stuff going on around them. And I was like, well, I would, in that case, typically what hearing protection does is it doesn't drown out all the noise. What it does is it just makes it less loud. You can still hear if you have normal hearing. So I told him, well, let the guy do it and then check back with him in a couple weeks and see to make sure that he's able to hear stuff going on around him. And so I wouldn't prohibit that. Actually, if you don't want to have anybody that ever has a hearing loss in your business, the noise level should be like 70 dBA or less as a time-weighted average. But the OSHA reg doesn't kick in until 85. Okay.
Okay. All right. We got about 4 minutes left here, so we'll wrap up. No more questions that I see. One thing I forgot to mention, I wanted to make an offer to everyone who attended. We do virtual evaluations for companies. So the goal is to learn what your company does, what kind of manufacturing you do, what your processes are, and therefore help you determine which OSHA regulations apply to your company, written programs, training requirements, record keeping, everything else that triggers, with the goal of not only making you aware of that, but giving you kind of a roadmap to start getting compliant and avoid fines, avoid injuries, and that kind of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and make that offer. I've been doing these for companies both on site and virtually for a lot of years, and with a lot of benefit for the company. So I'm going to send out an invitation to everybody who attended. If you're interested in that, feel free to. I'll send a scheduling link, and we can do that. But I want to thank everyone for attending, and I hope you found this to be valuable. Be on the lookout. I'll send out more information about other small manufacturing safety school events that are coming up soon. And we'll go from there. And Joanne, thanks again for helping out today. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone attending. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Bye.